Welcome to the Child Anxiety FAQ podcast. FAQ stands for Frequently Asked Questions, and I'll be answering your questions about child and teen anxiety. My name is Dawn Friedman, and I have been working with kids and families for over 30 years as a preschool teacher, parent educator, family case manager, clinical counselor, and now as the facilitator of Child Anxiety Support, a program for parents of anxious kids. All right, let's get started. Hey everyone, the question for this week is, what do I do about my child's anxiety? It's an enormous question. So obviously I'm not going to give you the be-all, end-all of answers, but it's inspired by the comments that I keep getting on TikTok. I explain something about anxiety and people say, what do I do about it? So I'm going to give you a very simple rundown of what you do about it, but don't expect this to answer all of your questions because anxiety is complicated and parenting is complicated. And your experience in your life right now and your child's experience in their life right now, it's all very complicated. So let's pretend like it's not complicated and just make it simple. So the first thing to know is that anxiety is about avoidance. We avoid the things that make it about avoidance. And we know that anxiety is a problem if it's getting in the way of family functioning and your child's functioning. If your child is missing out, or if you are missing out, it's a problem. Anxiety in and of itself is not necessarily an issue. Anxiety is a helpful emotion, and it's a natural emotion. We don't want to eliminate all of our child's anxiety. We just want to help our child cope with the reality of having an anxious brain. So first we look and say, where is there avoidance happening? Is my child missing out on social events? Is my child not negotiating a developmental issue that needs to be addressed? For example, a child who is old enough to spend time alone, but is struggling with that, is following you around room to room to room. Are you frustrated with your child? Here is my belief and my observation. Parents who are connected to their kids, who really are empathetic and involved with their children, if you're frustrated with your child, it is a sign, it is a tool in your parenting to let you know that things need to change. It does not mean that there's something wrong with you, that you're getting annoyed with your child. We all get annoyed with our children. And we can look at that and say, I'm a pretty good parent and this is a pretty good kid, and we're struggling with each other. Perhaps it's time to examine our relationship or what's going on or what tools I'm using. So if you're in a place of frustration with your child, that is a sign it's time to do something different. And how wonderful that you are a connected enough parent to recognize this. Okay? So that's the first thing. We look for avoidance. And then we look for how we are helping our child avoid. What are we doing in order to get ahead of our child's anxiety? What are we doing to try to protect them from feeling anxious? What are we doing that helps them avoid the thing that makes them anxious? And then we need to stop doing that. An example might be if your child is afraid of spiders and you're about to sit down and read a book with them, and then you remember there's a spider scene in this book, and so you don't read them the book. Actually, we should read them the book. We should help them deal with the fact that there's a spider in the book. Now, this is a really simplistic example. A 3-year-old who's afraid of spiders is different than a 12-year-old who's afraid of spiders. And a book that casually mentions a spider is different than a book that's got a big, colorful picture close-up of a spider. So that's what I'm saying. This is more complicated. But generally, that's what we're supposed to be doing, is helping our child go towards the things that make them anxious. If you have a child whose behaviors are very big when they get anxious, a child that becomes very dysregulated and upset, then we're going to take those steps even more slowly. And we use a careful plan to do this. We sit down and look at our child's anxiety, our anxiety and anxious response to their anxiety, and that's how we create the plan. We start very small where people are not going to completely lose their minds. So we're not immediately going to get a pop-up book about spiders and say, here, deal with your spider phobia. We're not going to say, go toward the spider in the basement. Instead, we might get a picture book where the spider is pretty friendly and there's not a lot of scariness to it. Or we might just talk about getting a picture book about spiders. We start very small. We don't avoid everything spider. We gradually introduce our child to spiders until eventually we know that when they're 34 and living on their own and there's a spider in the bathtub, they can handle it. We do not expect our children to be great at everything all at once just because we're ready for them to be great at things, right? And the same goes with anxiety. It is a process. It's not an easy one and done fix. We start with spiders maybe because that feels more accessible than starting with their big scale phobia about public speaking, for example. We start where we can have a pretty easy win and where they can experience themselves as brave. So if you have a child who is really struggling with, for example, school refusal or school avoidance, we would start very small and build up. And how that looks is individual. It depends on what your capacity is, and it depends on your child's level of dysregulation. But really, we're going to look at your capacity too. Because if you're overwhelmed with a million other things, if you just started a new job or moved or had a new baby, your capacity is not going to be the same as someone who's pretty settled and nothing major is going on. That's got to be part of the consideration too, because you are the one who's going to be managing the avoidance. The avoidance is what I call the parenting pitfalls, and exposure is exposure. It's just introducing your child to the things that scare them in a manageable way for you and for your child. Now, if you have a child, again, with these big behaviors around anxiety, the possibility is that you're going to trigger those big behaviors, and we create a plan for that too. If you have a child who's going to melt down, we make plans for them to melt down. We make room for it. How we do this is very individual. So when people ask me, just tell me how to do it, I say, well, that's how to do it. You go towards the thing that makes your child anxious. How that looks is going to be different for every family. But I hope it makes sense to you. The plan that we use is one called graduated exposure, which means we're not starting at the scariest thing first, right? We're not going right to that 3D spider pop-up book. We're starting smaller and easing into it. The tricky part is we're not waiting for our child to say, I am now ready. Instead, we are creating opportunity for them to be more ready. We're not surprising them. We are preparing them that we will be going towards more exposures. The easiest way to do this is to pull back on our protection, our avoidance, to get out of those parenting pitfalls. So instead of saying to your child, I expect you to go look at a book about spiders, we just say, I am no longer going to look at the picture books ahead of time to make sure there are no spiders in it. That would be the very first step. It wouldn't even be getting a spider book. It would just be saying, I'm no longer checking the books to make sure there's not a spider in it. Do you see what I'm saying? It's about our behavior, our avoidance, our protecting them. And instead, we let them know, I am no longer going to protect you from this because actually the protection is hurting you more. Actually, I'm protecting you from something that you don't need protection from, because looking at a book where there's a spider in it may be uncomfortable, but it's not dangerous. You see, when we help kids avoid, we tell them, your anxiety makes perfect sense. You cannot handle this, and this truly is dangerous. We think what we're doing is protecting them from their fear, but unless the thing is actually dangerous, what we're doing is telling them, you definitely should be afraid because either this is too dangerous for you or you're not somebody who can handle dealing with this level of anxiety. We need to help our children see themselves as capable of handling the discomfort of being anxious. If you have more questions about this, please go and submit them to the Child Anxiety Fact podcast. and perhaps I'll answer them on a future episode. Thanks so much. Thanks for tuning in this week. If you have a question you'd like me to address on the show, please go to childanxietysupport.com/question and you can post it there. Maybe I'll address it on a future episode. And if you'd like to learn more about my program, you can visit childanxietysupport.com. Thanks so much and have a great week.